None of us should be negotiating on the debt ceiling. It should just be lifted.
That's what the big spenders say, and they get their way. But what if this were the budget of someone you know?
What do you think of these people? They're making $24,000. They're spending $35,000. They're almost $11,000 in debt.
They should get their priorities straight on what they need to be spending and saving their monies on.
Actually, this is the federal budget. I just took zeros off.
Whoa, that's a lot.
What can I do for you today?
Suppose America were a person trying to borrow from a bank.
I would like to raise my debt limit.
Excuse me?
My debt limit, I'd like to raise it.
Yeah, it says here you're $140,270 in debt.
Right. So I figured we should raise that limit to about $170,000. I just bought a 60-inch flat screen.
America's bought plenty of flat screens and promises everyone many more things. Is there no limit on what politicians can promise? Who will pay for it? Oh, kids will.
Excuse me. I have to take some of these. No, I'm the old person. I need this. No, I won't give it back.
But stealing from kids isn't fair. So tonight, the week after government barricaded veterans away from their memorial, I say what America needs is a barricade to keep Congress away from our money. Because we're up to almost 17 trillion problems. That's our show tonight.
John Stossel.
Okay, Congress kicked the can down the road again, but this doesn't address the irresponsible spending that is going to bankrupt us. So tonight, we'll solve America's debt problems. Really, it's not that hard once you stop assuming that what makes America work is government. Our politicians didn't always believe that government was so important, and they used to spend billions less. Would you like the government? This week I was trying to think about how I can illustrate this, and so we built a big goofy chart and took it outside. This is federal spending per person since America began. It started low, less than 5% of the economy. Here's World War I. Here's World War II. Used to go down after wars, but now, even in peacetime, it only goes up. Pretty soon, we're up here. How are we going to pay for that? So what's going to happen?
We're going broke. Our grandchildren and even our children are just, they're going to be burdened with a big debt.
It's unbelievable the amount of debt that we're racking up in our country right now.
$20,000 per person.
It's astronomical.
This is where we're going.
Well, you should stop. You should stop.
We should, and yet there are some who just have faith that thanks to our brilliant politicians, things will work out. The woman using this scooter believes that. So how do we pay for my generation who's been promised health care, but now we're living 20 years longer?
I think that there are definitely plans for that. I mean, the Affordable Care Act's in place. I think it covers a lot of people, including people.
That's going to take care of that.
I think it will.
Yippee! The Affordable Care Act will just solve the biggest problems. If only it were true. But the truth is that government solutions are the problem. Government does too much and promises too much. Dan Mitchell and Abby McCloskey spend their working days looking at the budget and how it's grown, and they work for competing think tanks. Dan's with the Cato Institute, Abby's with the American Enterprise Institute. Dan, you say that the $17 trillion debt is not the problem, it's just a symptom.
It's a symptom of the problem of government being too big and doing too much. And let's do an analogy. Let's say that you went to the doctor because you were coughing a lot and you found out that you had lung cancer. Oh, that's really bad. But what if the doctor said, well, here's some Robitussin, you won't cough anymore? Will you be happy with that? No, of course not. You want to deal with the underlying problem.
If it worked, I would.
Well, it might get rid of your cough, but it's not going to deal with the lung cancer. And the problem is government has exploded in size, as that chart you had illustrated. And because of entitlements that are poorly designed and demographic change, the burden of government spending is going to reach European levels in the future. Something has to be done because no amount of tax increases is going to solve the problem. As a matter of fact, that would probably make the problem worse because politicians would just spend the money.
What's wrong with European levels? People say Europe's doing okay.
Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and it's just a matter of time before France hits their fiscal crisis, Belgium hits their fiscal crisis. All of the Western world, Japan, of course, is going to blow up, not in Europe, but same problems of politicians promising things they can't deliver and imposing tax burdens that are crippling private sectors.
And yet, Abby, all week I heard, and we're going to hear it from Bob Beckel later, the problem is this debt ceiling. They shouldn't have one. It's the uncertainty.
Right. I mean, the debt limit has been turned into the enemy in this debate as opposed to the actual federal debt. And in 25 years, everything we make and buy and consume in this economy, that will all be the same size as a federal debt. And we know from economic research that when a country has that much debt, we have really slow growth, less jobs, people can't retire. It's a real problem.
Today, the president said, stop treating government like an enemy.
People will stop treating government like the enemy when the government stops stealing from us.
And I'll stop regarding it as an enemy when it stops spending $3+ trillion. It's hilarious to go back in time and look how responsible Senator Obama was when he ran for president. He was upset about how the previous president increased our debt.
The way Bush has done it over the last 8 years is to take out a credit card from the Bank of China so that we now have over $9 trillion of debt that we are going to have to pay back. That's irresponsible. It's unpatriotic.
Then just 5 years later, Mr. Obama is president, and suddenly the debt isn't the problem, the debt ceiling is the problem.
Congress must authorize the Treasury to pay America's bills. This is done with a simple, usually routine vote to raise what's called the debt ceiling. This is important. Raising the debt ceiling is not the same as approving more spending.
It's not?
I already gave one unfriendly analogy involving lung cancer. Let's do another one. Let's say I'm a drug addict. I'm strung out on heroin. I will feel better in the short run if I inject more heroin. In the long run, though, I'll be better off whether I'm going cold turkey or a methadone clinic or figuring out some way to get from my addiction to being cured. And likewise, we have to figure out how we go from this addiction to government spending, whether it's financed by borrowing or taxes. That is the problem. We have to deal with it. We have too many people in our country who are being trapped by, in effect, the heroin of government dependency. We have all these special interest groups, lobbyists. Washington is one of the most corrupt towns you could imagine. We need to fix that.
Where you guys live, and where I don't see people objecting to it. Most people, we do.
Well, we heard a lot of people objecting to the fact that the government was shut down and that we were about to default on our debt. But it was shocking we didn't hear more people talking about the $17 trillion of debt we see. And the debt limit is one of the few times during the congressional calendar that politicians have to come together and fess up to all the free lunches they've been giving out and say, actually, this costs a lot of money, and guess who gets to pay for it?
But then we're doomed if nobody cares.
Well, people care. We saw the Tea Party care and, throw a wrench in this debate.
Sliver of the electorate.
It's a sliver of the electorate, but they have managed to capture the public debate and refocusing our attention to the debt. Now, their efforts in this last time were far from successful. I think a lot of people are disappointed about the deal we reached, but at least we're talking about the debt.
And spending, $3.6 trillion is the problem. And I find it fascinating how many politicians will say government doesn't even have a spending problem. Here's Senator Harkin from Iowa.
If we're so rich, why are we so broke? Is it a spending problem? No.
So it is almost a false argument to say we have a spending problem. We have a budget deficit problem that we have to address.
We don't have a spending problem.
Last year, President Obama spent 45% more than the tax revenues we got in. That's not some minor budgetary issue. That is an entire mismanagement of federal resources. We have a spending problem. It would be great if we could figure out a way to cap spending. Maybe that's something this joint committee, as part of the debt limit deal, can work on.
Good luck with that. And I get angry listening to some of these congressmen speak. It sounds as if they think the world revolves around them and government. Listen to Senator Durbin here talking to the press before this week's agreement. He's so arrogant.
People of America have seen this movie several times. The American damsel is tied to the tracks, and the engine is bearing down, and the question is whether or not Congress at the last minute will come to the rescue and save this country.
government's going to save the country.
I like Senator Durbin's analogy, but what he didn't tell us is that he's driving the train. And all the cars attached to the train are Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, the military budget, the Department of Transportation. That's what our problem is right now. We have gone so far afield from what our founding fathers wanted in terms of a limited central government bound by the chains of the Constitution. And yet, if you're one of the pushers up on Capitol Hill, which is what Senator Durbin and Senator Harkin and the rest are, they think it's great because they get to buy votes with our money.
I'll build on Dan's analogy a little bit. I mean, where is President Obama with this train bearing towards a damsel on the tracks? Instead of rising above the partisan bickering, the congressional gridlock, and acting like the leader of the free world we'd hope our president to be, he's urging the train to go faster.
Well, he likes to spend. He always
Who doesn't when you don't have to be accountable to who's paying for it?
All week I heard that not raising the debt ceiling would be a disaster for America, and that everyone knows that.
Philosophically opposed you might be to borrowing money, however distasteful it is to you ideologically. Everybody realizes that as long as we are borrowing money, not raising the debt ceiling, defaulting on our debt would be a very irresponsible thing to do. It would be a disaster for the country. Everybody realizes that.
Everybody realizes that.
Defaulting on our debt would be a disaster for the country, but that's not what would happen if we didn't increase the debt ceiling. The federal government this fiscal year is projected to collect 12 times as much revenue as is needed to pay interest on the debt.
The debt is $300 billion. They collect $300.
The debt,
they collect
the interest
trillion.
on the debt this year is going to be about $235 billion. Tax revenues are going to be about $3 trillion. Now, I don't have great faith in the competence of the federal government, but even I think that with $3 trillion, they could somehow figure out how to prioritize their spending so that they paid the $235 billion of interest on the debt so we didn't default. Would it be messy? Would it be a hassle? Yes, of course it would be. But this whole notion that we would default without an increase in the debt ceiling was either dishonest or ignorant.
And finally, I want to point out that people on the street didn't know what to cut when I said, they said, yes, we should cut. People had no idea what to cut. So what would you cut?
What would I cut? What would I cut? That's a tough question.
So what would you cut?
I would have to put some thought into it and see the choices, I guess.
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, I don't.
They just don't know.
We need reforms to entitlements for this country to be sustainable. And I would also recommend having some sort of cap on federal spending so we can actually have a real conversation about what size should the federal government be.
All we need to do is limit government so it grows at the rate of inflation and we balance the budget in 5 years. I would like genuine cuts, but simply slowing down the growth of government will get us where we need to be over time.
Good luck with that. Thank you, Dan. Abby, if you'd like to keep this conversation going, go to Facebook or Twitter and use this hashtag over here, maxed out, to let people know what you think. Coming up, there's nothing funny about our $17 trillion debt, but some Hollywood movie makers did find a way to make me laugh about it.
What can I do for you today?
I would like to raise my debt limit.
Excuse me?
My debt limit, I'd like to raise it.
Hard to get your brain around how much our government spends. More than $3 trillion this year alone, on top of our $17 trillion debt. So sometimes I like to lop 8 zeros off the budget numbers, and then you get a chart like this. It looks like a family budget, and when I show this to people, they understand. So what do you think of these people? They're making $24,000. They're spending $35,000. They're almost $11,000 in debt.
They should get their priorities straight on what they need to be spending and saving their monies on.
Actually, this is the federal budget. I just took zeros off.
Whoa, that's a lot.
That is a lot. And when they see this, they get it. And so I thought I was so clever to come up with that idea. But then I saw a video which is much more clever and a better way to explain the problem. A man goes to a bank to get a loan.
What can I do for you today?
I would like to raise my debt limit.
Excuse me?
My debt limit, I'd like to raise it.
Because the last time I checked, Mr. Smith, you were in serious debt.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Figure we should raise that limit.
It says here you're $140,270 in debt.
Right. So I figured we should raise that limit to about $170,000. I just bought a 60-inch flat screen.
And politicians keep spending. So I'm happy that even in Hollywood, there are at least a few people who think that's ridiculous. And two got together to make that video, put it on YouTube, where it's been watched more than 2 million times. Seth Meyer produced the film. Brian Stepanek was the actor and director. It's good you guys did that.
Well, we enjoyed making it. It was something that that we had talked about, and I had thought of the idea and pitched it to my brother. And we were both laughing so hard that I decided it was something that we should probably move forward with and write a script.
And yet you say you're not political.
Well, we just thought it was a universal theme that really, if we could lop off all the zeros, show it to a typical family, they could all get it. And it was amazing how quickly people kind of picked this up. I mean, we made this video 2 years ago, and it seems like it's just timeless because every time this topic comes up, we get a surge of hits and views, and people keep commenting about it now. And of course, you found it, and we appreciate the feedback.
And some of the numbers now are old, which you'll see as we play some more of it. Seth Meyer makes me think of that guy Seth Meyers on the Saturday Night Live, but you don't look like him, no.
Yes. No, we're from the same area, but yes, no, I get that a lot.
All right, so you made G.I. Joe 2 and Smurfs 2. You have a different...
Just take the credit, man. Take the credit. Yes, I am Seth Meyers.
Back to your movie. The bank officer asked the kind of question that a loan officer would ask.
Do you have some new income that I don't know about?
No, still making about 21 grand a year.
Okay. And are you still spending $38,000 a year?
If that's what it says.
So you're adding $17,000 a year in debt.
Oh, is that what it comes out to? Debt limit going up. Ding.
Have you made any cuts in your expenses?
Oh, of course, yes. My wife and I cut $380 out of our annual budget.
Okay, so you're adding $17,000 a year to your $140,000 in debt, and you cut $380.
Well, you say it like that, it makes it not sound like a lot.
You don't see how bad this is, do you?
I cut my budget by $380. Are you kidding?
And the 380 refers to what we supposedly saved at the last budget deal?
Right.
Yep.
Right. I just want to point out how brilliant that bald actor is. The guy is unbelievable. A little bit of a diva, but he's phenomenal.
Easy to work with.
Yeah.
Let's watch the end of your film where the irresponsible consumer and banker find a solution to the loan problem, the same solution America's politicians choose. The borrower brings in his daughter, and she signs the loan papers.
Sign there.
All right. Our kid's a blessing. I mean, she's got plenty of time to deal with all this, right?
Absolutely.
Are we all set?
You're all set.
All right. Let's go, kiddo. We got to meet Mommy at the car store.
Thank you, Seth and Brian. I'm glad millions of people watched that, and I hope you raised people's consciousness.
Thanks, John, for getting it out there.
Next, we look more closely at what the end of their film really means. America does assume our kids will pay our debts. I'm sorry, I need this here. Can I have, we have to pay for my Medicare.
It wasn't very nice of you to steal from my sister like that.
Excuse me, I need to take this phone.
What are you doing? Hey, give that back.
I'm old. I need this. Mr. Dowell, I need this dowel. Stop. I need to take this scooter.
Hey, give that back.
Taking things from kids is nice for me, but the rest of you have to deal with the debt bomb. Our almost $17 trillion debt's bad enough, but the real bomb is coming. It's coming because people my age rudely refuse to die. And we baby boomers have been trained to believe that we deserve not just Social Security, but the real budget buster, Medicare, which includes all the cool new stuff modern medicine invents. We paid into Social Security and Medicare our whole lives. We're entitled to get our money back. But what my generation doesn't know is that most of us will get back much more than we put in. And this is unsustainable. And to try to pay for it, we commit generational theft. We older people basically steal from young people. People like Ramesh Ponnuru. He writes about these issues for the National Review. So you're not that young, but you're going to have to pay for me.
That seems to be the plan. And, you know, people younger than me are going to have to pay for me. That's what this system amounts to. It's a kind of generational chain letter.
And that was what it was supposed to be when FDR set it up. What's wrong with that?
Well, the problem is that it's just fiscally unsustainable to keep promising each generation they're going to get more and more money, especially as the length of the average life is getting longer and the number of kids people are having is getting smaller, so that you've got to support people for a longer time in retirement and you've got fewer workers who are doing it.
People forget that when FDR created Social Security, most people didn't even live to age 65.
That's right. You know, it's one of those things that is part of our welfare state that has not been modernized and updated to keep account of changing times.
So some people say just raise taxes.
Well, you know, if you raise taxes, you're hurting the economy, and thus that's just another kind of generational theft because you're leaving a smaller economy to the future. But you're also not going to be able to raise taxes enough to make up for this shortfall. It is a huge shortfall.
Yeah, there are so many people roughly my age. We're the baby boomers, and you could double taxes and it wouldn't cover this. Unbelievable. I keep hearing these numbers. $30 trillion unfunded liability, $90 trillion. We spend $3 trillion a year, which is enough, but these future numbers are impossible.
That's right. It's I mean, if you want a good scare before Halloween, go look at the projections on U.S. federal debt, and those projections are driven overwhelmingly by Medicare and Social Security.
And the $30 trillion is going out about how many years?
You know, I forget which one, which numbers go with which, because the fact is nobody really knows. We don't know what healthcare costs are going to be like in the future. We don't know what miraculous but expensive new medicines there are going to be, but we do know that on the current system, the federal government is supposed to pay for it all.
Well, at least some people I talked to outside the studio were aware that young people will have to suffer to give money to people like me. How are we going to pay for that?
I don't think we're going to be able to pay for it. It looks like we're going to leave it to the next generation again.
We're going to have high inflation, high prices, shortages.
The real problem is entitlements. That's you two and me paying for our health care.
Right. That's right.
So you want to give some of your Medicare back?
No, not really.
Right now, this is kind of generational theft. It means you and I are stealing from these kids. It's like, I'm sorry, I need this here. Can I have, you know, we have to pay for my Medicare.
I don't like it.
It wasn't very nice of you to steal from my sister like that.
So they don't like it, but they don't vote. And even when they come to voting age, we older people are much more likely to vote. I don't see how this is going to end well.
Well, that's right. I mean, the good news is that we can make adjustments that are modest starting now. The bad news, and then, well, for example, we could make Social Security benefits not rise over time, you know, so that somebody who retires 20 years from now, they should get the same benefit level that somebody who retires today. Right now, the law says they're going to get a much bigger benefit. That would be great if we could afford it. We can't. That's the sort of adjustment you can make now so you don't have to make a sudden change when you're out of money. The problem is exactly what you said. Older voters, whether they're Republicans, whether they're Democrats, whether they're something else, they don't want to make that sacrifice, partly because they have been told they're just getting their own money back, even though that's not true. They're getting back a lot more than they put in.
And we older people are also richer. The median net worth of somebody over 65 is $170,000. Median net worth of someone under 35, $3,500.
Warren Buffett gets Social Security and Medicare benefits. It's part of the perversity of this system that so much of it is redistributing money to people who are wealthier.
Thank you, Ramesh. Coming up, I'll fight with a famous Democrat, Bob Beckel, who says, well, he says what this singer says.
Raise the debt ceiling, 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 raise the debt ceiling. 14 trillion in debt, but
Soon we'll be up to $17 trillion in debt. It's hard to get my brain around that, but it helps to look at our debt over time. For 150 years, America had almost no debt. Then it rose during world wars, came down after World War II, but then, starting around 1980, exploded. It's gone straight up, and this is unsustainable. Outside this building, the big graph I showed people was not America's accumulated debt, but how much we spend per person every year. And most who saw it agreed that America has a spending problem, and they wanted cuts. But then I asked, what would they cut? They said this. What would you cut?
Oh, my. I don't know. You can't cut education.
We need to cut spending, obviously.
What would you cut?
You can't cut health care, I don't think, because we all need...
So not health care. So what should we cut? Social Security?
No, I think...
Defense?
I'm not sure what else you can cut.
We're spending a great deal on the military, on medical care.
And that should be cut?
That's a hard question.
And you can't answer it either.
Absolutely not.
Few people had suggestions, which helps me understand the viewpoint of all those Democrats who say, just raise the debt ceiling. And one of those is the brilliant Bob Beckel. I say he's brilliant because you fight with 4 people on the 5 every day.
Yes,
and
I didn't.
Often win all by yourself. But you're not worried about this $17 trillion?
John, I like you a lot, and every time I hear you talk about this and that fear and pain on your face, I worry about you. The answer to your question is no, I'm not, because for the following reasons. Yes, it has skyrocketed. And why has it skyrocketed? Simple reason, which is defense spending and entitlement programs. That's why it's gone up. The rest of the budget is relatively insignificant. What is significant is that...
I think 30% is left after that. That's not nothing.
Yeah, no, but you also have to take into account the interest on the national debt.
Okay.
Which is,
but you're right. Defense and entitlements are the biggies.
That's right. And the interest on national debt, which is almost $300 billion.
Right.
And at some point, when I say the debt doesn't matter, what is it about the debt that bothered you personally? Not bothered you philosophically, but bothered you in your life financially this morning when you woke up. What was it?
Well, I thought about that $300 billion, and there are 300 million people in the country, and fewer than half pay taxes. So it's costing me a couple thou every year. In my bracket, probably 10 thou a year.
Okay, so you thought about the cost of your own personal tax liability.
And how it's going to hurt my kids, because they'll have fewer opportunities, because they have to pay for that.
Let me try to take you another way. This is assuming the projections on debt are always assuming the status quo, that nothing's going to change. Now, is there a reason to believe that that's not a bad thing to think, that they're not going to change things? Yes, except that for this. At some point, the interest on the national debt is going to begin to intrude on programs where you can't spend any money that both Democrats and Republicans like. Where can you cut out of the deficit that these people you interviewed didn't mention? Certainly the Defense Department. We spend more money for defense in this country than all other countries in the world combined.
We agree, but that's not enough.
No, what we ought to do is means test Medicare, because it's out of control.
You agreed?
Absolutely.
Any Democratic politicians who would propose that?
They're coming there because here I've talked to them about this, and I get down to this point. Boys and girls, I go to talk to their caucuses. They always want somebody to beat up on who's outside, so I go. And I point out to them that when you keep paying interest like this, at some point, whether it's a farm program or it's a Head Start or Meals on Wheels, something's got to give, because you're not going to have enough money. And what's going to get you guys to finally get this through your thick heads that you've got to do something about this is when the interest on the national debt, forget the rest of it, we can pay the interest on the national debt, $300 billion, $400 billion, but at a cost from something else. So I would say means test medical care or Medicare. I would say that you redo the formula on Social Security. Social Security was never meant to be a retirement program. I think if you go back and look at the debate about Social Security, it was meant to be insurance.
Sure.
That's what it was
for the
meant
few
to be.
people who live past 65?
That's right. And, of course, the life expectancy is now increased to, what, almost 80.
So you'll raise the retirement age?
I would certainly raise the retirement age. I would certainly raise the what do we pay now, $112,000, up to the first $112,000 for Social Security? I think that should go $150 to $200.
So take some money away from you.
That's right. I think we can afford that. But the Medicare thing, I mean, I can't for the life of me understand why we're spending this much money on people who are wealthy living in Florida, and we pay them these huge medical payments to take care of them when 85% of the medical payments for people occur in the last 5 years of their life.
I'm delighted to hear a Democrat talking about any cuts these days. We're out of time, but thank you, Bob Beckel. Let's continue this another time.
Let's do it.
Coming up, next time we run out of money, would default really be so bad? Wouldn't you rather stiff the Chinese and some rich bankers who hold government bonds rather than the American people? What would defaulting on our debt mean? That's next. Before the government shutdown, we were told a shutdown would be a catastrophe. But what happened? How do you feel about the shutdown, the partial shutdown?
I personally love it because life goes on.
Right. Life went on. Most people hardly noticed the partial shutdown. But, of course, default would be worse. Default means a government can't pay its debts in full. And I'm told that would be a real catastrophe.
The pain would be felt across every sector of society. They'd actually plunge this country back into recession.
I think this time we're playing with fire.
Now, default didn't happen either this time. But what about next time when we don't have enough money to pay our bills? Why not just default? Wouldn't you rather just stiff the Chinese or those bankers that hold bonds rather than not pay Social Security or the military? I would. But Garrett Jones says no, America must not default. And he's an economist at George Mason University, and I assume you know more about this than I. So where do I go wrong?
Well, part of it is that so many of us already have invested in America. We have pension funds, we have banks that we hold our savings in, and we have retirement accounts. And these are all ways that we've all saved. And if the government breaks its promise to debt holders, it's breaking its promise to many, many of us.
But at the rate we're going, we're not going to have the money. So three choices, right? They can inflate the currency into nothingness, so they give us the money, but doesn't have the value. Mm-hmm. They stiff the Chinese or the bondholders, or they don't pay the old people who need the money.
Yes. Those are really the three ugly options that face all of us, right?
And you're saying we can't do any of them?
I think they're all ugly choices, right? So my guess in real life, what will the rich countries do that face these problems, especially the U.S.? We're going to do some mixture of raising taxes and cutting spending because politically and economically, it's really hard to stiff it to the bondholders.
And why? Russia defaulted. Argentina defaulted. A couple years later, they were doing well. Well, relatively well. They're still Argentina and Russia.
Well, those are middle-income countries. They're not the richest country in the world. You know, there's something different about the average American getting pulled over for a DUI and the class valedictorian. When a country like the U.S., which has made every single bond payment since the Constitution was written, when a country like the U.S. breaks a promise to its bondholders, investors will be terrified for years to come.
Well, we break promises all the time. We said we were going to attack Syria. The president said in 2008 that he would cut spending. Mm-hmm. Why should this be so different? And back to Argentina or Russia. They suffered greatly. Their countries were way out of whack. Within a couple of years, they were growing at 8%. It's like prices found the new floor. They got a new start.
You're right. Every once in a while, someone who has had bad luck, a family that's had bad financial luck, can go through bankruptcy and they come right out soaring. But the U.S., we've been the financial center of the world for quite some time. The U.S. has been able to borrow at super low, super cheap interest rates. And our private sector builds on the stability of the government sector. So people would be afraid to lend money to big U.S. firms.
I would think they'd be afraid now because they can see the direction things are going. Merely by saying we're going to give you a 5% haircut, that then suddenly changes everything and then interest rates shoot up?
You make a good point right there, right? A 5% haircut might not scare international investors or American investors all that much. But a 5% haircut promising to pay 95% of what you owe isn't going to save us that much money either.
And we need much more. Well, let's take a look at this video made by a group that says it's a terrible thing that we rely so much on Chinese money to cover our debt. And it shows a Chinese teacher mocking us.
巨额的所谓刺激开支，庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
But what are they going to do? I don't see what the problem. They're not going to repossess the Empire State Building and Apple and General Motors. What can they do?
You're exactly right. When it's always really tempting for national governments to default on their debt for just that reason. There's no repossession agency in most cases, right? So, but the reason why is because nations want to keep their reputations. There must be some reason why when rich countries go to the trouble of defaulting, they actually end up only sort of half defaulting, partially defaulting. So they repay about 2/3 of it. Why? Because they really hate being cut out of the international credit markets. Governments and the private sector rely on borrowing to just keep the engines of capitalism running.
Thank you, Garrett. Coming up, our $17 trillion debt is not an insurmountable problem. It just requires a few cuts. And I'll make them when we come back. This week, Congress kicked the can down the road again. But in a few months, we'll be up against the next so-called debt limit. Congress created those limits because politicians thought it might put a ceiling on how much government spent. But it didn't. Or maybe it slowed things down a little bit, but now we're about to pass $17 trillion in debt, and soon, according to promises made to my age group, handouts and debt payments will eat the whole economy. At this rate, disaster is coming. Yet the attitude of many is captured nicely by the performer in that Reason TV video we've been playing.
Raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt ceiling.
None of us should be negotiating on the debt ceiling. It should just be lifted.
Raise the debt ceiling.
So Congress did, again. The only good news is that this time, thanks to some Republican pushback, big government is finally part of the debate. Lots of people I talked to said government needs to be cut.
This idea of kicking the can again to February is just a terrible concept.
Tonight I poked fun at how many couldn't name any specific cut.
That's really tough.
But I should also point out that some could. In my experience, this is new. So what would you cut?
Education and spending and social programs.
Really? What about the people who need them?
That's what the states are for.
You don't want to pay for my health care?
No, sorry.
What would you cut?
Anything not authorized by the Constitution, we eliminate.
What would happen to the poor people?
Well, I'm a poor person. I would eat. I would find a way to eat.
This woman borrowed $250,000 to pay for law school. Would you like the government to stop giving loans like that so we don't go broke?
I think the government makes it a little too easy for individuals to obtain loans.
It was too easy for you to get the loan?
It was way too easy. Way too easy. No questions asked. Here's $50K. Enjoy it.
Government shouldn't dominate the student loan business. Government spends an insane amount of money on harmful things. I nominate Nancy Pelosi for Ridiculous Politician of the Month for saying this when asked, well, won't Democrats negotiate cuts?
So why now?
Because the cupboard is there. There's no more cuts to make.
They spend almost $4 trillion and the cupboard's bare? This is nuts. Central planners think without big government, planes will crash, trains, parks, and Big Bird will disappear. But none of it's true. There is so much we could cut and should cut, like NPR and PBS funding. There shouldn't be government television, and Big Bird doesn't even need the money. Foreign aid, it usually does more harm than good. On to bigger cuts. End the war on drugs. When Americans hurt only themselves, leave them alone. Kill Fannie and Freddie. Government shouldn't finance 90% of America's mortgages. That's socialism. Eliminate cabinet departments like Commerce, Energy, Agriculture, Secretary. We don't need them. Commerce happens. It doesn't need a department. Education's a local responsibility. The Fed spending $100 billion a year didn't raise test scores one bit. Finally, the three biggest programs. First, defense. We are not safer when we try to police the world. We could cut military spending by hundreds of billions if we limited the military's mission to its intended role, protecting Americans. And finally, Social Security and Medicare. We have to do things like raise the retirement age and turn Medicare into an insurance plan that's self-sustaining. That means if I want the latest and fancy medicine, I have to pay for it myself. There's much more that could be cut. At downsizinggovernment.org, Cato Institute analysts detail hundreds of ideas. And in No They Can't, there's a chapter where I cut all the way to a fat budget surplus. But to save America from bankruptcy, we don't even need to make all those cuts. We could grow our way out of debt if Congress simply froze spending. They won't do that either. But even if they limited spending growth to 2% per year, we'd balance the budget in just 3 years. So let's do it. And that's our show. See you next week.